There was a rock and roll band that exploded onto the scene in the early '70s with all kinds of hits, and they were called Lynyrd Skynyrd, and they are classified as Southern rock, and these guys all grew up in the Deep South. And when I say Deep South, they grew up in northern Florida, the Jacksonville Panhandle area. And if you know anything about Florida, it's like the further south you go into Florida, the further you get away from the Deep South. Northern Florida is the Deep South. And the thing about the Deep South in our country is that there's been a lot of really interesting slang that comes out of the South that has peppered our language. And there are terms that you used to, I don't know if you do it so much anymore because America is becoming very homogenized, but there were times you would go into the South and you could hear people speak, and if you were from California, it was hard to maybe understand what they were saying. In the early '70s, I spent some time in the South in the Navy, and so I was around some of what was going on down there. Lynyrd Skynyrd was a band that was sort of, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon how you look at it, they were kind of a stereotypical rock and roll act of the time. They were very excessive in terms of drinking and smoking and using and gambling and their sexual prowess and those kinds of things. And if you ever see pictures of their studios, you would see them peppered with alcohol bottles. And when they would perform, all of that was present on the stage and things like that. But there was one member of the band who, in the midst of all those people, and Lynyrd Skynyrd was a big band. They had about 7 to 8 or 9 members, depending upon what incarnation they were. There was one member who caught everybody's attention. And this is where the slang term from the South comes in. So, he caught the attention of his bandmates because he had bought a brand new car. And it was some sort of a huge Cadillac, Lincoln, something, was tearing around in that when he wasn't practicing, recording, performing. And he surrounded himself with a number of people that he would go on, let's call it binges or runs or carousing with, all hours of the day and night, losing days, losing nights to excesses. And this one night he was driving around with a carload of people and he hit an oak tree and he demolished the car and he hit his face on the dashboard and the steering wheel, knocking out all his teeth, and the people who were with him, they were all injured. And when the police showed up and they came to deal with it, I mean, it was almost like you couldn't have made a more perfect scene in a movie. It was just, the wreck was surrounded by alcohol bottles and syringes and baggies and ashtrays and everything on that scene. And so the rest of the band kind of looked at him. You know, he spent some time in the hospital. He comes back, his face is all bandaged up, and he is continuing to do what he's doing. And so they look at him, and this is where the old Southern slang comes in. The slang is that smell. And what that means is that if something is going on with Uncle Bill in the family, and Uncle Bill, he's wrecking his cars and he's getting DUIs and he's going to jail and he's acting violently and he's sort of hiding out and separating himself and living in isolation at times. But everybody loves Uncle Bill. Everybody cares about Uncle Bill. So someone in the family might say, "What's up with Uncle Bill, man? What's going on with him? He just doesn't seem right." And someone in the family might say, "Well, that smell, man, don't you smell that smell?" And so Lynyrd Skynyrd, and the gentleman who wrote this song, his name was Ronnie Van Sant. And it's interesting because Ronnie Van Sant, all indications are, now he's no longer with us, so I hate to say this, he's not here to defend himself, but Ronnie Van Sant might have had some addiction issues himself. And he wrote the song with a gentleman named Alan Collins, who you could probably say the same thing about. But this is what the opening verse of the song goes. Whiskey bottles and brand new cars. Oak tree, you're in my way. There's too much coke and too much smoke. Look what's going on inside you. And then the chorus, oh, that smell. Can't you smell that smell? Oh, that smell. of death surrounds you. Now, what's interesting about these lyrics from Ronnie Van Sant, who himself had consumer issues of intoxicants, was the last line of the verse, "Look what's going on inside you." That's pretty insightful. Because what generally happens around this idea of whether we call it addiction or use disorder or whatever it's called, because of where I've lived in my life and I've spent so much time around this, is that generally people will say about their loved one, their son, their daughter, their mom, their dad, their uncle, their somebody, look at what he's doing. He just took out 30 feet of somebody's fence. He just went to jail. He just acted out violently. He just. And so they'll bring them into treatment and say, we need to have him stop doing that. But Ronnie Van Sant went to another level saying, look at what's going on inside you, which marries two pieces. It takes us away from the material expression of what the person's doing, and it asks the question, what's going on inside? Now there's a term that is very old in spirituality, especially in metaphysics, and the theme today is what the mystics wrote. And as far back as we can lay our hands on any kind of ideas that are concrete, say down on paper, about some of the oldest of beliefs, which really fascinate me personally. I'm fascinated by the oldest of beliefs in metaphysics that come to us from our oldest ancestors, antiquity, going back thousands of years. There's this idea of atmosphere, especially in the Eastern traditions, but it lives in all traditions. The atmosphere of the human being. We say, what is the atmosphere? And we think of the atmosphere of the earth, and we see all these weather dynamics and pressures and temperatures and what's going on the ground and under the ground and above the ground. And we talk about this entire atmosphere of what's happening. It's sort of an alchemal kind of thing. Well, the same is true of us as human beings. We have this atmosphere. That's what the song, That Smell, that Leonard Skinner recorded is about. It's about the atmosphere of someone. That smell is about, we could interchange it because, walking around saying that smell is kind of a rough thing to say all the time, especially about somebody we love. But the idea of what is their atmosphere? And so, in the area of dealing with addiction, we very much look at the idea that I think is so beautiful, and the reason it fits for me is because I think that this is what we have to look at in metaphysics. It's the whole of the human being, which is the holy trinity of mind, body, and soul. What are we as human beings? What is our atmosphere? What do we see in other people? What is it that makes us who and what we are? I'm absolutely fascinated by people. I love working with people. I find, there's all this talk about mysticism and mysteries, and I think that the mysticism and the mystery lives within each and every one of us, our personalities, what we're like, who we come from, where we come from, what do we take with us, what do we begin to amass on our own, the atmosphere of us. And what's really interesting about this whole thing is that as a person who's been involved in counseling for years, my job essentially is that when I have an individual in front of me, my job is to be present for them, for whatever reason they are in front of me. And I have to become an atmosphere reader. Now, there are some people, especially in the spiritual world, we hear people have gifts around energy work and physical work and healing work and auras and all that sort of thing. And I'm not gifted in that way. I don't see colors. I have studied energy work. I've gone to seminars. I've even gotten a little bit of certification, but I don't consider it my thing. It doesn't really resonate with me. It doesn't seem to come through me. But I still believe in the concepts of the atmosphere and the energies of an individual. And sometimes in metaphysics, especially New Thought metaphysics, we can be kind of cerebral sometimes, and we can have a tendency to think about we focus so much on consciousness and thinking and change your thinking, change your life, and how do we show up, which is absolutely wonderful. It's beautiful. But for me, I go back to that Holy Trinity, the mind, the body, and the soul. And I find that part of my reading of the atmosphere of people is to be mindful of the physical presence. While we as people, we can verbalize our thinking, we can verbalize how we feel, we can also verbalize in the physical realm. And what do I mean by that? I want to go back to the question in the song. Look what's going on inside you. How do I know what's going on inside somebody? Well, there's a concept that's come up, and I don't know how old this concept is, but you hear about it a lot with energy workers, called cellular memory. And cellular memory for energy workers is looked at in terms of trauma. Now, so let's talk about what this means. A lot of you, I suppose, are aware of the people who call themselves animal whisperers, horse whisperers, dog whisperers. And in the 80s and 90s and into this new century we're in, there's been a lot of focus because I think that those beings that we call animals, our four-legged brothers and sisters, I think they were kind of marginalized for a long time in our culture. But now we understand they have their own wisdoms, that they have their own lives, that they are much more cerebral than what we thought they were. They feel in ways that we didn't think that they felt. And so the classic whisper, let's call it the horse whisperer comes before the horse, and there's this beautiful animal, and the person's paid a lot of money for it, and they love this horse dearly. But this horse is just tearing down the stalls and tearing down the fences and biting whoever will come near it, and will not take a saddle, and is kicking and is tearing up the corrals and is terrorizing the other horses. So they bring the horse whisperer in, and the horse whisperer has a way, and I don't know how they do this, but I've read a lot about it, but they have, sometimes these gifts people have are so hard to transfer and to understand, and they stand before the horse or the dog, and they take some time to let this being know that I am not here to hurt you, I'm not here to push you around, I'm not here to tell you what to be, I'm here just to be present. Because I want to observe you. I want to take in your energy. I want to take in your atmosphere. And so once that's established, then, and this is something I saw in a video, and it was so powerful to me. I think I may have shared this in a talk I told once before here. I can't remember where I say what I say, including the shower sometimes, But the horse whisperer comes to the side of the horse. Let's say the horse's head is up here, and now has gained the trust. I'm present for you. I'm here. And we'll take his hand and hold it, say, this far off the body, off the horse's body, and go back. Walk very slowly, just walking back. Just walking back. And right back here, there's a flinch in the hide. The horse's head begins to move a bit. Takes another step. Now the horse's head comes around. The owner of the horse is behind the fence. And he will say, or she will say, there it is. There's where the trauma took place. Not even touching the horse. This is where the trauma took place. This is what's still inside this horse. This is what they're trying to deal with. The song said, look what's going on inside you. I don't believe in metaphysics we can discount the physical aspect, the material aspect of ourselves. This concept goes back and there's wonderful mythology in all of religion, and I don't even claim to know a fraction of it. There's all this great mythology, all these great stories, and what theological scholars tell us is that mythology is ancient psychology. Mythology is ancient psychology. What do I mean by that? So here's the story I love. So Siddhartha comes to the Bodhi tree to take his seat for enlightenment, to face his healing. And so the mythology is that 9 storms came in and blew him around and blew the tree around, and he was pelted with everything, with lightning and hail and rain and wind. And some shadow demon came in riding an elephant with an army of the shadow, and they tempted him and they called him names and they frightened him and they threw storms at him and they did all these things to him, and he sat and he sat and he sat and he took it in. And when we say mythology is psychology, what's that mean? We talk about, hey, how are you doing? Hey, man, I have had a rough week. Let me tell you, Let me tell you about the week I've had, but here I am. I'm here today, and I've kept myself. I've buoyed myself. That's what that's about. That's about, what's been referred to as the dark night of the soul. That's what Siddhartha was there doing. He was doing the dark night of the soul. And so it says that he went through all this for hours and hours and hours of torture and pain and confrontation and fear. And finally, this demonic shadow expression of mythology says to him, by the way, I do not believe your journey. I do not believe your path. And there is no one here to be witness to what you've been through in terms of your journey to this tree here today. Listen to that. I do not know or honor your journey. It says at that moment, Siddhartha, who was in the lotus position, and we know that in the tradition of Buddhism, the hand gestures are very important, so he's got one hand in his lap. He takes one hand and he lays it on the earth. At that moment, the earth rose up and said, "We stand witness to his journey." And at that moment, it says, the elephant of this demon buckled to its knees, and the army ran away because they realized what was inside. They realized the journey. That's cellular memory. That's how important our material journey is. So how does it come up in my line of work? I sit with somebody across a table, or maybe there's no table between us, but a lot of times there is. This old wood round table where I work, I sit there. And a young woman in her early 30s is talking, and we're just kind of talking, and we're having a conversation. It's all over the place, and then suddenly something comes up where she starts talking about when she was a child. And a member of her family had done something to her, and she begins to rock. And I take note of that, rocking. What is rocking about? Imagine rocking an infant. Why do we rock babies when they're crying, when they get up at night? Why do we walk around rocking them? To soothe them, to let them know they're loved, hold them close, rock them. And she's rocking as she's talking to me, and her eyes become heavy. Isn't that a baby telling us that they're starting to be okay? She was never rocked. When she went through what she went through, there was no one there for her. Now when she talks about it, she's trying to rock herself. That's cellular memory. That's the flinching of the hide, the whipping around of the head. You see, Ronnie Van Sant was a genius when he said, "What's going on inside you?" Ernest Holmes said about atmosphere is the presence of conscious and subconscious thought patterns, which in turn becomes the direct reason for and cause of that which comes into one's material expression. You want me to put that into English for you? The guy who busted up his car, busted up his face. What's going on inside you, man? How come you can't put this down? And when you physically heal enough, you go back to Jack Daniels and heroin and methamphetamine. And if you get busted up again, you'll do it again. What's going on inside you? What is that atmosphere? How many little kids like, "Mom, how come you don't want to stay here? Why do you want to leave so bad? I love you. Isn't my love enough for you?" The atmosphere of us is so incredibly important as to who and what we are. Metaphysics says this, and this is what grabbed a hold of me with metaphysics. I had done a number to my own life, which is its own story, and I was beginning to step into some healing in my early 30s. And I met the woman who I would marry, my beloved wife and lifelong partner and best friend. I met her about that time, and I had gone a long ways, but I was still, healing, I believe, for most of us is a process. I'm in the process, and things are getting better. And she comes to me and she said, she and I weren't even really involved in terms of romantic or anything at that time. She was a good friend, and she turned me on. She said, "There's this place, there are these teachings and there are these ideas that I think that would be so great for you." And so she turned me on to New Thought metaphysics, and there was a place people talked about it, and I didn't know that. And I was so down on religion at that time. I was so down on, because of my own stuff, that's another story. And so I took myself there. And one of the first things that I read, and this is Ernest Holmes, that touched me so dearly. Because you see, the thing about metaphysics that gets my attention is that when people would tell me, "Hey, it's okay, don't worry about where you are in life, because at some point some other guy out there, a savior, somebody, he's going to come in and take care of it all." I'm not hating on anybody. I don't mean to disrespect any religion. Man, that did not fit for me. I didn't get that, right? And so when people would tell me that, it's kind of like, oh man, that just bums me out, right? And so there's this little tiny quote in Science of Mind. It was one of the first ones I got turned on to. And it's the word spiritual. And this is how Ernest Holmes defines spiritual. Spiritual indicates the atmosphere of God. Oh my God. Do you know what that told me? That when I enter into spiritual practice, I am entering into the temple of God. I am entering into the atmosphere of God. And within my spiritual practice is a way to begin to heal what Ronnie Van Sant said. What's going on inside you? All these beautiful teachings, all these classes, all these ideas that are done in our centers and from our philosophy are about lifting up and changing our atmosphere. Hey, dude, you got a busted up car. You got whiskey bottles all over the place. You got syringes. What are you going to do? You know what? I'm going to go get some counseling. I'm going to start reading some stuff. I'm going to get into some classes. I got to change some stuff that's inside me. When that young woman sits in front of me, rocking in front of me, talking about what some relative did to her at the age of 5 and 6 and 7, then we need to talk about that, and we need to find a way to heal that. And we need to find a way for her to confront that and heal that and move into that and bring in the principles of spirituality. Reverend Mary talked about, before I came up here, the power of prayer in this place, the power of prayer, the power of meditation, the power of the teachings to rise up the atmosphere of who and what we are. There's all kinds of ideas about what religious science and centers for spiritual living are. And for me, it's about the idea of rising up our personal atmospheres. When I do this class, I was asked, what book am I going to have people read? And I don't want anyone to read a book, but this is what I'd like people to do, if they're interested, is get online and start looking for everything John Bradshaw. And John Bradshaw was not a religious scientist. John Bradshaw in the 60s became a seminal figure in the power of shame with regard to people and the inside of people. So when Ronnie Van Sant says, "What's going on inside you?" John Bradshaw would say, shame, low self-esteem, a diminishment of self, something carried around within us that lives in our memory in some level, on a conscious or subconscious way. And when we can face that, and when we can sit, as Siddhartha did under the Bodhi tree, and face that and speak our truth and move forward into that with courage and with wisdom, the wisdom of the mystics, the courage that we gain from community and from those who can help us and from ourselves, and we can move into that, we can move into transforming the atmosphere of who and what we are. And I've worked in a field where I've seen it over and over again. People who should not be walking among us, getting back life, enjoying life, building families, building love, building joy, and building healing. So I'd like to take this into a prayer really quickly because I'm way over time. I really apologize, so I'll do this. So, as we come together in a prayerful atmosphere, I am so grateful for the potentiality that we are as human beings, and the potentiality that exists within the truth of spirit. And knowing that wherever we are, spirit is there. And I'm grateful for our presence in spirit and spirit's presence within us. Knowing that we each and every one of us has an amazing birthright. And that birthright is to experience the atmosphere of heaven itself, the heaven consciousness of peace and joy and meaning. And I am so grateful for these promises. And in my gratitude for this, I let my word go, knowing that it's so, and so it is.